Eric Lanask here at Cloud Expo in New York City. Talking with me today is Esmeralda Swartz from Ericsson. Esmeralda, good morning. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So if you look around, it seems like any company that's got any sights on succeeding is doing something around cloud. Where does Ericsson see the big opportunity, and sort of what's your motivation?
So I think this is a great example of what happens when you bring technologies that are very complementary together and they start intersecting. So cloud, Internet of Things, big data, you really can't talk about one without the other. Ericsson is really driving the connectivity and the software that is then put on top of those connected devices that makes it possible to bring to market new services as a result of advances in cloud or Internet of Things. And then what happens when you put big data in the mix and you start being able to drive a lot of the analytics that enable you to think about creating new services, new products and offerings that have never been possible before.
So one of the interesting things is we've always been able to collect and accumulate a ton of data. IoT is only going to add to that massive data, but not all that many people have excelled at effectively analyzing and utilizing all that data. How's that changing?
So I think you're beginning to see platforms that are being put together by various suppliers. We're not going to be able to do it all on our own. It's in order to move away from these vertical-oriented stacks to more of a horizontal approach that really leverages the power of ubiquitous connectivity that is deployed on all those sensors as a result of all those sensors. And then what happens when you collect massive amounts of data? Because it's like you said, I mean, it's really critical to go from just collecting data to turning it into information. And people always forget that if it's just data, it's not terribly useful in terms of what you can do with it. So I think analytics are going to certainly play a big role in helping us understand what we can do with that data. And then how do we then go to the next step in terms of the new services that are now possible as a result of what that information is telling us, and then how do we monetize those new offerings that are being brought to market.
And the other side of that, how do you bring that information full circle back into the Internet of Things, and whether it's power related or security related or whatever other vertical markets or features you have?
Yeah, I think that you're already starting to see the impact in many industries. So I think if you look at the smart meter or utility industry, you're starting to see the impact of smart meters and sensors, and then what can happen when you start driving some of the demand response programs that really are, a partnership with a homeowner or an industrial player, private enterprise, and government to drive some of the efficiency in the grid. You have examples of smart cities where we're already seeing the impact of having all of these sensors deployed on pretty much anything that you can think of, whether it's a light post or a parking spot or a park bench or a waste receptacle. So all of these things that you take for granted that are physical assets are now turning into an opportunity to improve the experience of a city dweller. That's just an example in the context of a smart city. I think in the industrial internet, you already see the impact of companies like GE that, of course, have deployed all these sensors on industrial machinery. They have the cloud analytics or the analytics layer, a cloud infrastructure. And the result of that is that the data that's being collected from those industrial machines is not just being utilized to improve the efficiency. It's also being turned into an opportunity to monetize the data that's coming out of those machines to then come back into their customer base.
Esmeralda, how is Ericsson's role changing in terms of bringing these opportunities to reality?
So I think the role of all companies is evolving. So Ericsson has been the leader in providing the networks that are powering all of this. So we support over 40% of the world's mobile traffic runs across networks supplied by Ericsson. So it starts at the connectivity layer and ensuring that we have truly deployed global connectivity in all parts of the world. And then what do you do with that connectivity? Once you have that in place, you can start looking at some of the value on top of that in terms of the services and the software that make possible new offerings into the market.
What are the risks involved? Are there significant risks involved with everything becoming connected? What if, aside from vulnerabilities and things like that, hackers, what happens if something goes wrong, some of that connectivity fails?
So I think that's one of the areas, as you highlight, that people are really concerned about. So the example that people always use is, okay, now we're in the mode of using a self-driving car. What happens there? That's where having bulletproof reliability is absolutely critical. It has to be always on. You cannot afford to not have that real-time connection severed, because it means the difference between life or death. I think in looking at some of the statistics where people are concerned about, okay, how do I interact with even a self-driving car on the road, I think that the data suggests that the self-driving cars, at least from an accident perspective, are a lot safer than a human being being in the car, and we all are guilty of this. We're supposed to be focused on driving, not performing secondary tasks in the car. So I think that a lot of what is now possible is that rather than being defocused, you can perform the task at hand and have the automation and IoT come into play to perform those secondary services. So in the car example, think about a personal assistant in your car. Rather than you checking your phone, and we all know we're not supposed to do that, to look at where my next appointment is, because I'm worried about being late because I'm in a traffic jam. The personal assistant knows where your appointment is going to be, can look at the traffic congestion, can send an alert telling your appointment that you're going to be late because you're stuck in traffic. So that technology is actually here today, and that's an extremely useful application that we can all relate to. So
we've got autonomous cars that drive us from home to office or to that appointment.
Not yet.
Personal assistants that are going to notify our appointments if we're running late. What do we do in the cars?
What you're supposed to do, which is drive.
Sounds good. Are there other, aside from eventually getting towards those autonomous vehicles, other more near-term opportunities that you see on the horizon?
So I think that the self-learning car is here today, and that's obviously coming before we're at the point where we're doing driverless cars. I think smart cities are here today, and you're starting to see, certainly a lot of development in developing countries that have an aging infrastructure, and they're using it as an opportunity to utilize technology that in many cases is not being utilized in developed countries because the cost of upgrading that infrastructure is obviously extensive. I think that smart cities are very illustrative. I think the industrial internet, if you look at every industry that you can imagine, whether it's aviation or energy, drilling, anything that you can imagine that requires a piece of heavy machinery is already seeing the impact of IoT in terms of the efficiency, just from an OpEx perspective. And we're not even at the point where we're yet seeing some of the applications that will come after that.
Well, that's the fun part, when we start seeing all those wonderful applications.
Yeah, our job is to help you realize and enable those applications and be able to monetize them.
Excellent. Well, I certainly can't wait to start seeing more and more of those roll out. Esmeralda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.